Are you familiar with these? These are mini charm packs, and I have several in my stash. Now this year I wanted to try to use some of the pre-cuts from my stash, and there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I just really want to sew from my stash as much as possible since I have so much fabric, and then also since I have been pre-starching my fabrics, I found that these are hard to work with, but so I want to get them used up and I want to move them out of my stash. So, but I do want to use them. Some of these are super, super cute. This is one called Be Jolly by Deb Strain. Super, super cute. Would make a darling projects for Christmas. I have two of these put out by Moda called Poetry. They just have some beautiful fabrics in those. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a pretty fabric line. These are all older because I bought these quite some time ago. Now for today's project, I used 2 mini charms, and I had to get one additional square from my stash, one additional 2.5-inch square from my stash that would coordinate, simply because there weren't quite enough. Between these two, these all have 42 squares, and that is 84, but I needed 85 squares for my projects. So I did have to use one, and I needed 32 inches of fabric, but I just cut a yard so I could square up the fabric and be sure I had just enough. Now, if you don't have the mini charms, you will need 85 2.5-inch squares. You can get in your stash and cut up, 2.5-inch squares, or jelly. You can cut them from jelly rolls. If you just have one, you can pick out coordinating fabrics from your stash. And in these are just 2.5-inch squares I cut from some jelly roll strips that I had from a fabric line that I really, really like. So there are lots of options. I have one All Hallows Eve, which is, I think, my all-time favorite fabric collection. And I have plenty of fabric in my stash to cut more 2.5-inch squares if I want to do one of these projects with another fabric line. Now today I'm going to be showing you several options for making projects with these 2 mini charms and your basically yard of background fabric. So get your mini charms or your 2.5-inch squares cut and get your background fabric ready, and let's get started. So this was the first design that I came up with, but since it's been up on the wall, I've come up with a couple of other options and I've changed my mind a little bit. So let me show you what those other options are. So here's your first one. This would make a perfect baby size quilt, or a wheelchair lap quilt. And this is 5 by 7 rows. So this is option 2, and this would make a beautiful Christmas table topper, or if you did it in another holiday print, it could be, for any holiday, but this would measure 30 by 30. Then this would be your third option as a table runner, and this would measure 18 by about 36. We're going to switch, and I'm going to show you how to construct this, and I will give you the fabric requirements for each of the different layouts. The layout is just a simple 9-patch block. So you will just sew that together, and you will alternate it with the background squares and the other blocks, and it makes just a beautiful, simple Irish chain. Now, I have 3 different options. Earlier I showed you 3 different options, and I'm going to show you those with the fabric requirements next. Now here's the one that I finally decided on. This is the baby quilt or wheelchair lap quilt that will measure 30 by 42 inches. This is made up of 5 columns and 7 rows. The block size on all of this is 6.5 unfinished and 6 finished. Okay, so the fabric requirements for this quilt will be 85 2.5-inch squares. Now, I used 2 charm packs plus 1 2.5-inch square for my stash that coordinated with the fabrics. You'll need 68 of the little background squares, which are also 2.5 inches, and you will need 18 6.5-inch background squares. Now, I cut the 68 background squares from 5 strips that were 2.5 inches by the width of fabric, and for the background I cut 3 strips that were 6.5 by width of fabric, and I used those to cut the 18 6.5-inch background squares. And this is what I finally decided to use. Now the next layout is the table topper, and this is 5 rows by 5 columns. The fabric requirement is 65 2.5-inch squares, and again you would need 2 of the mini charm packs. You'll need 52 of the 2.5-inch background squares, and those were cut from 3 strips that were 2.5 inches by the width of the fabric. And you'll need 12 of the background squares, which were cut from 2 strips that were 6.5 by the width of fabric. Now, I almost went with this, but decided I wanted to use all the pieces, all the blocks I had pieced, so I made the baby quilt size or the wheelchair lap size quilt. Now, the last one I wanted to show you is the table runner, and this is 3 by 7, 3 columns by 7 rows. Oops, I goofed up there. That should be 3 columns by 7 rows, not columns there. And then this finishes 18 by 42. It took 55 of the 2.5-inch squares, so again you'll need 2 charm packs. It took 44 of the 2.5 background squares, and it took again 2 strips of the 6.5 by the width of the fabric strips to cut the 10 6.5-inch background squares. It's there so you can take a snapshot or screenshot of those if you'd like. And then here are the corresponding layouts. Okay, so I ended up making my original design. I was going to just stop with the 30 by 30-inch table topper, and I decided no, I wanted to go ahead and put it all together so I could use all my squares that I had pieced, and I think this will make a sweet little quilt for a donation quilt. Now, in the comments below, tell me if you have these mini charm packs in your stash, and if you do, how do you use them? I'd love some more ideas so I can use up some more of mine. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with a friend. And until next time, have fun quilting.